He looked Arnold dead in the eye and smirked. You came here with muscles and movies, but when we gave you real power, you folded like a visa application. The room froze. Even the moderator flinched. Arnold did not. He leaned forward and replied, I became American by choice. You inherited it like a crown and sold it like a casino. If this moment made you stop scrolling, imagine what else they do not want you to hear. Subscribe for stories they tried to bury and voices they failed to silence. This is not just content. This is resistance, one view at a time. The lights had barely settled. The room smelled of stage makeup and old ambition. A national town hall, broadcast live from Atlanta, framed as a night of bipartisan civility, had just shifted from awkward politeness to something colder, something surgical. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair. The camera favored him, as always, his suit sharp, his cufflinks glinting under the stage lights. He turned toward the man seated across from him, older now, but still carrying the frame of myth. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat motionless, eyes steady, face unreadable. Trump smiled like a man rehearsing cruelty. You came here with muscles and movies, he said, voice slow and smug. But when we gave you real power, you folded like a visa application. The sentence did not land like a joke. It landed like an accusation. The air in the studio thickened. A few nervous titters from the audience died quickly in their throats. The moderator shifted in her seat, hand twitching toward the cue card stack, as if searching for a parachute. Arnold did not blink. He did not smile. He did not react the way television expects people to react when they are insulted on live air. Instead, he reached calmly for his water, took a small sip, and set the glass back down with the care of a man who knows where every camera is pointed. Then, with the same voice that once narrated the American dream in a dozen action movies, he answered, I became American by choice, he said. You inherited it like a crown and sold it like a casino. Silence. Not the kind of silence that invites applause. Not the kind of silence that begs for a comeback. It was the kind of silence that makes producers in control rooms swear under their breath. The kind of silence that makes sponsors check their email for exit clauses. Trump blinked once. For a flicker of a moment, just long enough to catch, he looked, not surprised, but annoyed, like someone who had expected an easy opponent, and instead met a mirror that did not flinch. The moderator coughed gently and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. She mentioned bipartisan solutions, infrastructure. A question about housing policy hung in the air like a bad punchline, but no one was listening. Not really. The clip was already being clipped. Someone backstage had uploaded the raw feed to the network's digital team. Another intern watching from a side monitor sent a screen, recording to her group chat. Within seconds, the quote was out. Within minutes, it was everywhere. I became American by choice. You inherited it like a crown and sold it like a casino. On Twitter, it was set to orchestral music. On TikTok, a slow zoom in and a bass drop. On Reddit, it was meme ready before the next question even aired. But in the room, the atmosphere was shifting. The tension had not dissipated. It had ossified. Trump leaned forward again, but this time not to respond. He tapped his fingers once on the desk and glanced at his team offstage. A small nod, just once, as if to say, this will be handled later. And it would be, because Arnold had not just insulted a former president. He had exposed a wound in the national myth. One man who came here with an accent and muscle had just redefined what it meant to belong. The attack had been wrapped in civility. The comeback in clarity. But underneath both, something ancient stirred. The American tension between inheritance and intent, between birthright and belief. And Arnold had dared to suggest that a man could earn his citizenship with action, while another could lose it through corruption. That was not just television. That was treason to a narrative. In the control booth, someone asked whether to cut to commercial early. Another voice replied, do not touch a thing. This is not just a broadcast. This is history. Whether it would be remembered as righteous or reckless, no one could say yet. Back on stage, the conversation continued, at least in form. But everyone knew the event had already peaked. Cameras stayed fixed on Arnold longer than usual. His expression gave them nothing. No esmir, no victory lap, just stillness. And that made it worse. Later, media outlets would debate his tone. Analysts would ask if he had gone too far. Commentators would read meaning into his posture, his cadence, his choice not to respond further. But none of them could erase the moment that had landed, not because it was loud, but because it was true. And truth, when spoken without apology, cuts deeper than any punchline. What if the last American standing did not even start as one? It began with a calendar change. A polite email from a network's programming director, stamped 7:13 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Subject line, slight adjustment to town hall flow. The message explained that the format had been rearranged slightly to allow for more open dialogue. Arnold read it twice. He had been in this business long enough to know that rearranged slightly rarely meant accidental. Originally, he had been told he would appear during the second half of the broadcast, after a segment on national security, after a roundtable on jobs. The new schedule placed him front and center, opposite Donald Trump, within the first 10 minutes. He stared at the screen for a long moment before closing his laptop without replying. By noon, more oddities emerged. His team, usually kept in the loop about live stream platforms, had not received credentials for TikTok broadcast access. When one of the staffers asked, a producer casually replied that it was not relevant to primetime audience. That same afternoon, an intern flagged a private note. It had been slipped under the hotel room door, where Arnold's head of logistics was staying. No envelope, just a folded white page, typed with no signature. It read, "Foreign-born do not dictate legacy." No context, no name, no threats, just that one sentence, left like a seed in the dark. Arnold read it without speaking. He folded it once more and slipped it into his coat pocket. He did not tell his team. That night, he received a call from someone he had not heard from in 5 years. Randall Pierce, a television director from his governor days. The kind of man who knew when to speak plainly and when to disappear. "They are not staging a conversation, Arnold," he said without preamble. "They are scripting a collision. You walk in thinking you are the bridge. But they already built the fire on both ends." Arnold stayed quiet. Pierce continued, "They do not want you quiet. They want you caught on camera, asking for silence." It was not fear in Pierce's voice. It was fatigue. The kind that comes from watching too many good reputations get swallowed by bad framing. When the call ended, Arnold stood alone in his suite. The city below him blinked with 1,000 windows, none of them looking in. He poured himself a glass of water. Then he walked to the desk, pulled out a notepad, and wrote one sentence. "Do not become what they expect." The next day was a blur of sound checks, lighting tests, back-to-back neutrality briefings. Everyone called it prep, but Arnold had seen battlefields. This was not preparation. It was containment. He was told not to wear dark colors. Makes you look too imposing on camera. He was advised to speak in shorter bursts. Attention spans are fragile. He was reminded that this was not a debate, just a civil exchange of ideas. Then came the final cue, a last-minute addition to the camera setup. A hidden angle, a wide-shot position to capture full-body reactions. His team had not approved it, but no one asked. By the time he stepped into the green room, the air was already charged. Donald Trump's team was huddled in the hallway. One aide shot Arnold a glance too long to be casual, too blank to be friendly. In the makeup chair, the artist, young, polite, trembling slightly, asked if he wanted to cover old scars. Arnold shook his head. "Leave the lines," he said. "They earned their place." When the stage manager knocked, it was not with excitement. It was with ritual, the kind you use before sacrifice. As Arnold walked to the backstage corridor, he passed a wall covered in framed photos. Past presidents, past hosts, past debates. All smiling, all lit perfectly. He looked at them only once. This was not a celebration. It was a setup, and it had sponsors. The network would play it as balance. The producers would call it brave. The headlines would call it provocative. But Arnold had seen enough controlled chaos to know when the violence was not loud, it was implied. They had dressed it as conversation, but it was not about answers. It was about footage. It was about pushing a man they could not control into a corner, where every word could be twisted, every pause could be turned into doubt. What they did not understand was that Arnold had been in corners before. Corners do not scare men who had already spent half their life proving they belonged in rooms they were never invited to. So he smiled once, not for the cameras, for himself. They did not fear the accent. They feared what might come out of it. The moment was not supposed to survive past the room. That was the assumption. That was the plan. Television had long since mastered the art of damage control. You let the guest speak. You capture the controversy, and then you shave the edges off in post-production. You soften the blow. You frame the narrative. You keep what sells and erase what is not. But this time, the moment slipped the leash. Arnold's response had been sharp. Too sharp for comfort. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just undeniable. He had delivered a line as if he were stating a fact, not launching an attack. That was what made it dangerous. I became American by choice. You inherited it like a crown and sold it like a casino. The sentence hung in the air like smoke, drifting over an audience that had been conditioned to expect theater, but had instead been handed a confession wrapped as confrontation. Donald Trump did not interrupt. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hand, and for a brief second, the camera zoomed in just close enough to catch it. The tremble, small, involuntary, but unmistakable. That shot was not planned. That angle was not rehearsed. But someone in the control room saw it, and they knew what it meant. In the broadcast booth, a junior producer cursed loudly. How the hell did that go live? The room went tense. Another producer scrambled to mute the TikTok simulcast, but it was already too late. The auxiliary feed, the one meant for behind-the-scenes content, the one no one paid much attention to, had been left untouched. That was the feed connected directly to the digital team's private server. That was the feed with the widest angle, the highest frame rate, the cleanest audio, and it had captured everything. Within 5 minutes, the raw clip was circulating in 2 group chats of interns, 3 newsrooms, and the private Discord server of media analysts with over 100,000 followers. By the 10th minute, it hit Twitter. By the 15th, the hashtag was born. Hashtag Visa did not fold at first. It was shared quietly. Then it exploded. Users paired it with old images of Arnold in military poses, young Arnold in bodybuilding competitions, Governor Arnold at the podium, immigrant Arnold holding his naturalization certificate. I did not vote for him, but that line hit. Say what you want. He said what none of them ever dared to. This was not a burn. This was a history lesson. Trump supporters tried to pivot, but they had nothing. No pre-written meme. No curated counterclip. No edited moment to discredit. Just silence. And a 6-second shot of their leader swallowing his reply. The edit team at the network headquarters scrambled to respond. They began cutting alternate versions of the broadcast, reframing questions, rearranging the pacing, even exploring whether they could overlay a reaction shot to soften the impact. But the damage was done. Not by the show, by the feed. Later that night, an anonymous source inside the control booth revealed what had gone wrong. A single engineer, responsible for monitoring the redundant feed, had intentionally refused to kill command. When asked why, he simply said, "It was not wrong, it was just not convenient." The next morning, his credentials were revoked. He was escorted out of the building. No press release, no explanation, just silence. Some called it breach of protocol. Others called it the last honest decision inside a dishonest machine. What could not be argued was this: what the cameras captured, the people kept. By midnight, news outlets were already quoting the moment as if it were scripted. Articles labeled it a defining pivot in the immigration discourse. Think pieces emerged overnight, some praising, others condemning, none ignoring. Cable networks raced to catch up, but they were hours behind. Arnold, meanwhile, had gone dark. No tweets, no press statement, no post-show interviews. He let the clip do what truth does best when left untouched: spread. In homes across the country, people watched the clip not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear. No metaphors, no evasions, just a man refusing to flinch in a space designed to intimidate. And that made the networks panic more than any insult ever could. Because if the moment was allowed to stand, so too was a question it raised. Who gets to define what it means to belong? And why does it scare them when someone answers without raising their voice? When the edit fails, the truth bleeds out live. It began with a headline. No warning, no context, just a familiar photo and a familiar stain, pulled from the archives and placed front and center in the morning cycle. The immigrant who fumbled character. Below it, a grainy image of Arnold from 2 decades earlier, walking out of a press conference, lips pressed tight, hands shielding his eyes from the camera's flash. The story was old. Everyone knew it. The scandal, the apology, the fallout. But this time, it was not dredged up for truth. It was deployed. CNN aired a segment at 7:05 a.m., a recut of a 2003 broadcast, spliced with updated commentary. There was no transition, no statement relevance, no connection to the town hall clip. Just the past, dragged into the present, without a sentence to explain why. Other outlets followed suit. Talk radio picked it up. The blogs that orbit politics like vultures circled again. On social media, the phrase resurfaced with hashtags wrapped in sarcasm. So much for courage. He is no better than the rest. Funny how fast character changes clothes. Arnold did not respond. Not on camera. Not online. Instead, he stood in his home office, staring at the mirror. The lights were dim. The city outside had begun to move, but his room remained still. He had been here before. This exact quiet. This exact heat in his chest. He studied his reflection, the lines around his mouth, the scar near his left brow, the remnants of youth that had once built an empire of image. Then, softly, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "I built muscle to hide shame, but I built silence to survive." The words hung in the room. He walked over to the old cabinet in the corner. He opened the drawer that stuck slightly, the one he never used. Inside, a stack of photographs, curled with time. He pulled out one near the top. Himself shirtless, golden, triumphant. Crowned as Mr. Universe. The body that had opened the doors. The smile that had disarmed rooms. He turned it over. A line written in his own hand, younger and bolder. Make them clap before they question. He stared at it. Then slowly, deliberately, he tore the photo in half. Then again. The pieces dropped to the desk like confessionals. It was not a denial. It was not defiance. It was a release. The phone buzzed behind him. Dozens of missed calls. His team asking how to respond. His publicist drafting possible statements. His political allies debating whether to distance or defend. But Arnold stayed quiet because he understood the strategy. The resurrection of shame was not meant to clarify. It was meant to distract. They did not attack the truth of what he had said. They attacked the mouth that had dared to say it, and they knew exactly where to aim. The scandal had been resolved in the legal sense. But in the public mind, shame has no statute of limitations. And for a man who had just spoken with moral clarity, it was the perfect smudge. But this time, it did not work the same way. Something had changed. On Reddit, a user wrote, "I know the past, but I watched the clip again, and I still believe the moment was real." A high school teacher in Illinois tweeted, "We showed both videos in class today, the town hall and the scandal. My students said one was about power, the other about survival." A caller on a morning radio show said, "Everyone has a closet, but not everyone has the nerve to open it and still speak." The machine was trying to make the story about who he was, but the people were watching who he was becoming. Arnold sat at his desk, the shredded photo beside him, the headlines blinking through his feed like echoes from a former life. He did not smile, but he did not hide, because when you walk through fire once, you do not fear the smoke. They thought the old scar would silence him, but it only made him speak cleaner. The van pulled around the back entrance of the local affiliate station in Fresno. No signs, no crowd, no press. Just an empty alley, a heavy door, and the quiet where an overworked air conditioner humming against the wall. Inside, a small crew waited. No makeup team. No audience. Just a camera, a desk, and a low-budget host with a clipboard and careful questions. Arnold had refused all major appearances. National outlets had called. Cable news had begged. Late-night hosts had offered to reframe the moment with humor and a carefully edited monologue. He said no to all of them. He would not trade clarity for convenience. This, however, was different. A small station, local programming, one interview with a host who had once been a schoolteacher before switching to journalism. It was not for headlines. It was for the record. As Arnold stepped out of the van, Elena touched his arm. "Look," she said. He followed her eyes past the corner of the lot. There, on the sidewalk outside the gated entrance, stood a quiet line of young people. Maybe 20, maybe more. All of them students. Most of them brown, black, Asian. Some wore university sweatshirts. Some stood in jeans and hoodies. All of them held a sheet of paper in their hands. The same sheet, printed in black ink. A quote, "I did not inherit it. I earned it. No chance. No livestriams." No signs or slogans. Just a row of bodies standing still, holding truth like a flag they were never given permission to raise. Arnold paused. For a moment, he did not move. Then he gave the smallest nod. Not of gratitude, of recognition. Inside, the interview began. The host welcomed him with a soft smile, her voice more teacher than broadcaster. She asked about the town hall, about the fallout, about the funding loss in Fresno. He answered simply, without flair, without rhetoric. "I spoke because it was true," he said, "not because it was safe." At the end, she leaned forward. "One last question," she said, "from someone who wrote in." She held up a card. A fifth grader from a local school wanted to know, "Did they forgive you?" Arnold did not smile. He looked toward the window. He could see the line of students still standing outside. One girl had sat down. Another was helping an elderly woman unfold a chair. He turned back and said, "I stopped asking. I just try not to lie anymore." The host did not respond. She just looked at him and nodded, as if something heavy had been passed between them. After the camera stopped, Arnold stepped out into the afternoon light. The sun was soft, filtered through the haze that often hung over the Central Valley like a memory that refused to burn away. He walked past the parked cars, past the security guard who tipped his cap, and toward the students. They did not cheer. They did not step forward. They just held the pages higher. He walked the length of the line. Slow, silent. The only sound was wind. A boy, maybe 16, whispered without lifting his eyes, "Thank you for saying out loud." Arnold stopped, looked at him, then kept walking. One girl had written the quote in marker on the back of her math notebook. The ink had bled through. Another wore it printed on a shirt, homemade, too large, tucked at the waist. No one took photos. No one reached for autographs. No one tried to go viral. They had already seen what happened when someone did. Elena caught up to him as he neared the van. Her voice was low. They did not come to be seen. They came to stand. He nodded before stepping into the vehicle. He turned back one last time. The students were still there, still holding the quote, still silent. He did not raise a fist. He did not wave. He just let the silence stretch, because that silence was not empty. It was full of what had been said, and what had been risked, and what could not be unsaid now. It was full of everyone who had never had a mic, and everyone who had been told to wait their turn, and everyone who had been taught to shrink their voice to fit inside the lines of someone else's comfort. It was full of the sound truth makes when it is finally spoken. They unplugged the mic, but the silence only made the echo louder. The studio was small. No lights, no handlers, no earpieces, just an old table, 2 microphones, and the kind of air that comes from places where people speak plainly, because there is no reason not to. Arnold sat across from a podcast host barely half his age. No makeup team. No publicist hovering off camera. Just a producer in the corner, checking levels, nodding once before giving the silent cue. The host leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice steady. She was not here for drama. She was here for clarity. "Do you regret saying it?" she asked. Arnold did not hesitate. I regret that it took us this long to say it all. The room stayed still for a moment. She waited. Then she asked the second question, the harder one. Were you afraid? He looked down at his hands, thick with age, callous with memory. Fear is easy, he said. Silence is easier. But regret becomes a shadow that never sits still. They spoke for 48 minutes. About the town hall, about the fallout, about the students in Fresno, about what it means to choose a country that does not always choose you back. No sonoritas, no commercial breaks. Just two voices in a quiet room, pulling the threads of the conversation no one else had the stomach to finish. When it ended, the host thanked him without a handshake, just a nod. Arnold stood, stretched his shoulders, and walked toward the door. Outside, the sky was gray, neither morning nor evening, just a stretch of time where things could still change. Waiting near the exit were 7 children, none older than 13, 3 from Syria, 2 from El Salvador, 1 from Haiti, 1 from somewhere no one had bothered to write down. They did not speak. They did not hold phones. They did not smile nervously or reach for a photo. They stood in a loose semicircle, small hands tucked into sleeves, faces calm. As Arnold stepped past them, each one bowed their head, not in reverence, in recognition. His assistant whispered, "You think they know what you said?" He did not stop walking. "No," he said, "I think they know why I said it." And that difference between words and the weight behind them was the only legacy he still believed in. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was earned. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A truck passed slowly. But at the studio door, the world held its breath a moment longer. Later, the podcast episode would quietly break streaming records. Not because it was marketed, not because it was boosted, but because people shared it the way they share something sacred. Whisper to whisper, link to link, one person at a time. There were no reaction videos, no think pieces, no angry montages on cable news. Just one moment, a man speaking, without apology, from a scar and not the script. Some said it was too little, too late. Others said it was the beginning of something they had stopped hoping for. Arnold did not say either. He just kept showing up, because the mic was never theirs. It was borrowed. And every time one man stands, the silence breaks a little. And that is how empires lose control.